My name is Matt Mrozek, and I would call myself a professional model builder. So I primarily specialize in large-scale collectibles, mostly like Marvel characters. So like the Beast right here is considered quarter scale, so 1/4 of his actual size in real life. So I specialize in building and painting these large-scale superheroes for collectors, and also do some commercial work for companies, collectible companies.
So what got you into painting models?
Okay, that's a long story. So initially, as a kid, after seeing Star Wars, I wanted to work for ILM. I wanted to build spaceships. So that's kind of what sparked my interest in model building initially as a kid. You know, I'd build airplanes and blow them up and set them on fire and things like that, but never painted anything. And then in high school, I started taking auto body class, so paint and body class. In the course of doing that, one of the kids that was in my class, his family owns a restoration shop here in Dallas. And they specialize in 1955, 1956, and 1957 Thunderbirds. And as one of the few students that was actually taking the class seriously and actually wanting to learn, he asked me if I'd be interested in helping him out of the shop. Like, yeah, sure, not knowing what I was getting into. So I started working at the shop after school during the week, and then I'd work on Saturdays, usually 5 to 6 hours on Saturday. And I kind of learned how to restore Thunderbirds, doing paint and body work, metal work, tearing down cars, putting them back together, sandblasting, some paint restoration, basically what I learned in school and just applying it out in the real world. And then I found out while working there that this is like the most well-known restoration shop in the world for these particular cars. So I kind of, oh, that's kind of cool. So we had some pretty, like, we did something for, we did a car for Prince. We did a car for Alan Jackson. I got to paint Frank Sinatra's car. So we acquired Frank Sinatra's 1956 T-Bird, and it needed a fresh paint job. So that's pretty cool. So the whole thing is we would paint cars, take them to auction, or sell them to private individuals. So that's kind of where I got my like painting chops and learning how to fill and sand and prep and all that stuff. Fast forward probably 10 years or so, I discovered Gundam models quite by accident. I was like in a Walmart or something. I saw a Gundam model. I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. So I bought one and snapped it together and like just put it on my shelf. And then a few years later, I kind of discovered that again in New York City. I was on a photo shoot, and had a day off, and I found a toy store called Toy Tokyo. And they had all sorts of Japanese pop culture and statues and anime stuff, and they had a whole section of Gundam models. Like, oh yeah, I kind of remember that from when I was a kid. So I bought one, I brought it home, and it's like, I should paint this thing. So I painted it, and it was like the very first model I actually painted, and it turned out really, really well. And this is before social media and Instagram and Facebook. So I kind of discovered a whole community of Gundam model builders in the US, and there's all these different modeling building forums. So I found some in the US, which then I found some in the UK, and so I just belonged to all these different modeling forums and kind of became friends with a lot of people all over the world who were into this thing. And so I just kind of started doing that for myself, posting photos, showing my work, and I just had a knack for the painting aspect of it because I had done the paint and body work. So the painting part actually came relatively easy to me because it's just the same concept, just smaller. So yeah, so the first few I did turned out nice, and I got a lot of positive feedback. And there's a couple forums where I hung out where like the top model builders in the world would hang out, and they gave great constructive criticism and feedback. And so I learned a lot just from talking to these guys who've been doing this a lot longer than I have. So at that time, it was just a hobby. And it just kind of, eventually, I got asked to do a commission. This was back in 2000 and I think 8 or 9, if I remember correctly, for a Gundam piece. And it was like a large scale, something, I've never built something this big, large scale, 400 or 500 piece. And that was my first paid job. And so from there, just kind of, I got a little more work. I wasn't trying to find work. It just kind of happened. Once people find out that you do this and they can hire you to do it, and if they like your work, you'll continue to get more work. Whether you want people, whether you're looking for it or not, it just kind of snowballs. Oh, I got this done by so-and-so, or, Matt Mrozek built this for me and it looks great. So that was 15 years ago. And then, so I did Gundams for about 10 years. And I discovered figures by accident, quite honestly, in 2015, when a buddy of mine convinced me to go to a show in Louisville, Kentucky called Wonderfest. And it's a model building convention. It's 3 days long, and it's nothing but sci-fi, figures, and fantasy. So you won't find any planes, you won't find any tanks, nothing like that. No military stuff. It's all sci-fi, fantasy, figure stuff. And so I bought my first few figure kits and did one. It's like, this is really cool. And so I kind of got, 2015, kind of got hooked into that. So as I was doing that for myself, again, I discovered by accident this large scale, quarter scale superhero stuff on Facebook. You know, the way Facebook works and most social media, as you like things or you look at things, it just keeps dumping stuff on your feed. So this picture of a really, as a beast, not this one, but a beast standing up on a desk, it was like a really cool digital sculpt. Like, man, what is that? How do I get one? I want to build and paint that. So it led me down this rabbit hole of discovering this whole genre of collectors that collect this stuff. So I just happened on it by accident, and I got to know the sculptor. I got to know the guy who actually made the kit, and found out that you couldn't find them. They're crazy expensive at the time. So it just kind of led me down a rabbit hole, and I discovered other groups and sculptors and things, and I bought a few. I was able to afford a few kits. They're expensive. On the low end, they're $600, and they go all the way up to $2,000-$3,000 for an unpainted kit. So I was able to buy one or two and painted them for myself. Again, through social media, I posted photos, and that kind of got me known in the collector world, which I had never been a part of before. So it's just it's all really by accident, to be honest. And then it just kind of, again, I had someone ask me, well, is that for sale? It's like, yeah, sure, why not? I don't have room to store it. I just want to paint it. So I sold one, and then I sold the other one, and then people would ask me, well, do you do commissions? Like, yeah, sure, why not? So, and again, I wasn't looking to do it. It just kind of happened. So, you know, 2023. So I started doing this as a commissioned figure painter, probably 2016. So 7 years ago is when I got my first figure commission. And then eventually just turned into full time.
Let's talk about the prep work you have to do just to get it ready to start painting, and then what it looks like in terms of, you know, how long the painting process itself will.
So it really depends on the piece. This one in particular came to me as a raw 3D print. So someone printed this at home on their 3D printer and sent it to me as a raw print. So this one has quite a bit of work to do before it's ready for paint. Even though it's a digital sculpt, some things don't fit. There's gaps in the arms and the feet, so I've got to go in and fill the gaps and resculpt some of the textures, the details. The feet didn't quite fit in the base, so I had to what I call rekeying, meaning making sure the keys fit and everything doesn't wobble. So this one's got quite a bit of work on it before it's ready to paint. So my estimation is on the low end 20 hours, on the 20 to 30 hours just in prep before it's ready to paint. A lot of the pieces I get come from China, where they have a factory of workers that do all this stuff already. Because what they do is they'll 3D print a piece, they'll clean it all up, they'll make molds of those pieces, and then make castings. So they're casting kits, and then the factory will clean it all up and get it ready for paint. So it'll come to me and it's pretty much ready to go. Although I do go in and I'll make sure that, you know, sometimes I gotta rekey things, they don't fit white, or the magnets, they'll have magnets, they'll be reversed. So I got to dig the magnets out and flip them around. So it really depends on the piece. This one's got a lot of work because of the way I got it. I've got some other pieces here that are garage kits that are traditionally sculpted, cut, molded, and casted. Similar thing, comes pretty raw. Pretty rough. You got to get things to fit, fill the gaps, do some sculpting, get a primer. So on the low end, sometimes I get something and I wash it really, really well and it's ready to paint. You know, maybe an hour or 2 hours. On the high end, it could take me 3 days, 4 days, 5 days of just building and prep before I paint.
And then, so once it's prepped and ready to go, what do you think for the beast here? What do you think that paint process looks like?
So my client sent me some references to go by as far as colors go. I mean, Beast is blue, so he's relatively simple. The pants are traditional X-Men pants, so those are pretty traditional. It's kind of like the base is where I get a little artistic freedom as far as colors go. He sent me some colors, but the digital render is pretty boring, so I'm going to do my own thing. As far as the amount of time for paint on this, again, if I had to guess, is probably 30 or 40 hours of just paint. And a lot of that's because of the way I work. I do a lot of masking with masking tape, and that's just very time consuming. It also depends on how I approach the piece. Beast will mostly be airbrushed. The base will probably mostly be hand painted, just because it's not broken into little pieces. The more pieces, the better, actually. It's easier to paint. There's less masking. This is all one piece, the bases. So there's like flames coming out of there and all these mechanical bits and stuff. So my initial thought process, I'll probably airbrush the flames, and then everything else will be hand painted. So I reduce the masking time. And that plan usually changes. I'll be doing one thing, it's like, I'm going to do this, and then it's constantly evolving in my head as I work, as far as like how I'm going to tackle something. I usually never have a plan. I just start throwing paint on it, and it works.
So tell us, how your background in auto body painting translates to something a much smaller scale.
So the concepts are the same. Your final paint job is really going to depend on the prep work. Now, there is a lot of skill and technique in the painting process depending on the different effects you're trying to get. As far as paint and body goes, really what comes in handy is knowing how to get things to fit, the putty work, and being able to kind of sculpt to a certain extent. I'm not a sculptor. A lot of people think I'm a sculptor because of what I post. Oh, did you make? I didn't sculpt it. I just built and painted it. So just knowing that aspect is really helpful, and how to get the prep as perfect as possible before you start putting any paint down. Because anything that's not prepped correctly will translate later into your paint. That's sanding scratches, parts not fitting. Like on Beast in particular, I've got to fill all the gaps in his arms. I got to resculpt the fur, so I got to know how to do that. If I just put putty in there, it would look really weird. It'd be like a really smooth line, and it would be very obvious that his arm was not attached at one time, so I got to blend that in. And that kind of goes back to auto body when you're working on panels and stuff and trying to get panels to blend in, and if you're working on doors and fenders, getting those to line up and blend all smoothly and stuff like that. So yeah, it's really the prep work more than anything. The painting techniques, as far as auto body and this goes, really don't come into play as far as, again, kind of depends on the techniques you're using. If I'm going for something super shiny, high gloss automotive finish, translates right back to doing auto body work. A lot of this stuff is airbrush shading, different techniques with brushes called like dry brushing and wet blending, and all these other techniques come into play that have nothing to do with auto body and only translate to model building. So I'd say the most part of it would be like the prep work more than anything.
So for this, how did you teach yourself how to paint in this style here, or how does one start painting? Yeah,
so as far as, I'm going to go back to Gundam a little bit, because that translated more towards, that was more relatable to auto body stuff, because the painting techniques are a little more similar depending on if I'm going to paint something and I want it to look relatively new or clean. That translates kind of back to auto body. It's when you start going and doing like detail shading, like if I want to add highlights to things. Again, kind of like back in the Gundams, the normal way to do it would be like to paint something and put a bright highlight in the middle of a panel. That's something that you don't do in auto body. You just have to learn that process. So again, I just kind of going back into the Gundam stuff, I just look at photos and I look at people doing stuff on the modeling forums and kind of just take what they did and practice. And I happen to be good at it pretty much right away. I mean, I don't want to sound like I'm bragging, but it just kind of came naturally to me. Getting into the figure stuff, which is the toughest thing you'll ever paint, is skin tones. It's the hardest thing you'll ever do. Just because it's infinite possibilities to make it look realistic, which I'm not actually the best at doing. There's some guys that have been doing this a lot longer than I have. They're way better than I am. But every time I do a portrait, I learn a little tip or trick from a friend of mine or someone. It's like, hey, how'd you do that? It's like, oh yeah, just do a little whitewash on the forehead. Or the one that sticks out is a friend of mine told me, put some purple in the eye sockets. A really light purple wash in the eye sockets. And I did, the first time I did that, it was like a light bulb going. It's like, holy crap, this thing looks alive. So it's just taking those little tips and tricks from other painters and just kind of applying them and then adjusting them to the way you like to do things. So it's just really, there's a huge community of painters and model builders. And for the most part, other than like I can think of only one person that wouldn't share a technique with me. But I can call up some of my friends who do this full time. It's like, hey, I'm really struggling with this particular thing. Do you have any tips? And that's where like the purple in the eyes came from. A friend of mine, John Allred, who paints full time. It's like, hey man, any tips for skin tones? I'm really struggling. He's like, yeah, just start putting some purple in the eyes. Like really, really thin purple wash in the eyes. And that was like an eye opener. So I took that technique and started kind of applying that all over the body. I'd do like purple in the eyes, a little pink on the cheeks, on the nose. If I'm doing hands, I'll put little red washes on the knuckles. And a wash is basically really watery paint. It's like when you first put it on, you don't see it. But you do it, you just kind of build it up real slowly. And it's one of those things that you don't see it, but you see it. Like, this thing looks alive, but I really can't put my finger on it. So it's very subtle. So it's really hard to make sure you just kind of do some techniques really slow and build it up. So I learned from other people. I learned from YouTube a lot. If I need a certain technique that I don't know how to do. Like for some reason I did a bunch of stuff with snow effects on the bases. I've never done snow. So I went on YouTube, how to do snow effects. And I found a couple tips and tricks and just applied to what I was doing. So YouTube is it's a university of knowledge of whatever you want to learn. So YouTube and just friends who do it full time, that's how I learn. And then I just buy application. A few techniques have come up kind of on my own. I tend to be really good at anything that has to do with textures, anything mechanical. I tend to have a knack for. I think that goes back to building Gundams for so many years. So I tend to have a knack for that. So people like the way I do leather. It's like the most random thing. But I came up with a technique using watercolors, and I basically take a brush and it's called stippling, and you just kind of dab paint on. And I use like 12 different colors. I just build it up real slowly, and I get this kind of cool leathery texture with oranges, yellows, browns, even some blues in there. And as you layer it real thin, it just kind of all melts together. And then I'll use an airbrush with a clear brown or a clear burnt umber or something, and I'll do the shading. And by the time I'm done, it looks like worn leather. It actually feels like leather too, because the paint texture gives it kind of that rawhide feel to it. Oh, wow. So I just kind of came up with that on my own. It's like I need a rawhide belt. so I just started playing. It's like, how did I get that effect? So I started playing and kind of came up with that technique. So some of it I learned from other people. Other things I just learned by trial by error. How did I achieve that? Looking at, and when you're trying to achieve something in particular, like the last project I finished was a really large scale magneto, and my client wanted multicolored cobblestones on the base. I go, how did I achieve that? So he sent me some reference photos, and in the photo he sent me, he had like purples and blues and greens and reds. Well, I'm not going to paint the bricks purple, blue. That doesn't make sense. So I basically painted them all the same color, and I had a palette. I had one of these, and every palette had a different colored wash. Again, a really thin color paint. So I had blues, greens, purples, reds, browns, and I would just go each brick individually, and I'll put a little green on there, and I would dab it off just to stain it. Oh, I'm going to put a little purple in the corner here, dab it on, stain it. So I'm just staining the color. So every brick was individually painted, and on this particular piece, there aren't any two bricks that are the same. But when you look at it, it's homogeneous. It looks like a multicolored cobblestone. So it's just, again, going in and playing with paint. That's what I do. I play with paint every day. I literally play with paint every day.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So a lot of times you have to kind of get past what you're looking at. You can't look at, okay, this is a brick, or this is a blue furry guy. You kind of have to look past that and look at the colors and how the colors interact with each other. Color theory is knowing color theory is huge, because you have to know, okay, if I put green down, but then if I put red on top, I'm going to get brown. You have to know how those colors are going to interact with each other, because they're very thin layers. So like when I do skin, it's usually on the low in a 10-step process, but it gets up to 15, 20 steps, because it's all the base coating and then doing all the washes and then all the fine detail painting. But it's all very thin layers. If I do a Hulk, which I don't do a ton of, when you look at a Hulk that I do, you can see all the way back down to the primer layer. You don't know it, but you're seeing all the way back down to the primer. It's just really thin layers building that up, and just just how all the colors kind of meld together. So again, just learning techniques from other people and trial by error. But looking past the object and just looking at the color and how do I achieve that kind of thing.
You said, social media, people just kind of find you. Are you advertising these days that you do this, or is everything still just kind of word of mouth?
Word of mouth. So it's interesting. So going back to Wonderfest, I had someone come up to me last year who's now a client of mine as of yesterday. He's like, "Oh, you're Matt Mrozek. I've been following you since the Gundam days." Because everyone knows my YouTube from the Gundam stuff, because there weren't many people on YouTube doing Gundam stuff, especially the big kits that I was doing, like these huge resin 300, 400, 500 piece kits, because they're expensive and they just take a lot of time. Most people are doing little plastic snap together stuff from Bandai. I was probably one of the only people on YouTube at that time doing it 12 years ago. So a lot of people know me. So he came up to me last year. He's like, "Oh, I know you from your Gundam days." And so we got chatting. And then this year we hooked up again. And he's like, "You know what? I got this particular kit that you did that kind of got me into wanting to do this. But you know what? I'm never going to do it as good as you." He's like, "Do you want to do it?" It's like, "Yeah." He's like, "How much would it cost?" So I gave him a price, which is not cheap. He's like, "Let's do it." So actually, we talked last night about his project. So he's now a client of mine. But Facebook, I don't advertise. It's, I have my personal page, which I do post my modeling stuff on. But then that's where I make fun of politics and all that other stuff. And then I have my modeling page, which is strictly nothing but this stuff. And that's my Matt's Models custom page. And I have the same YouTube channel, which isn't crazy active, but it's just posting on social media. I don't do Instagram simply because I hate the way they crop my photos. I don't like the fact that I can't crop the way I want. So I'm like not on Instagram hardly ever. Like I post a photo and it cuts off right here. Like that's stupid. Yes. I hate it. It's terrible for photographers. Yeah. Even though it's supposed to be for photographers, it's not for photographers. So I really don't post on Instagram too much. But I do have a few people that share my work on their Instagram page. And they'll hashtag me and the sculptor and all that stuff. But Facebook is like my go-to place just to share work. I belong to probably 25, 30 different groups on Facebook, but I only posted probably 10 of them. But typically after I post a piece, I'll get inquiries from people who have never hired me before. "Hey, do you have that? How much does it cost to build and paint this thing?" So yeah, it's just Facebook really. It's how I get business. It's the best avenue for me, but I'm not actively advertising. I did find out I should probably get some business cards because a few shows I've been to, like, "Do you have a business card?" I was like, I haven't had business cards in years. The ones I do have are from my photography business, which I don't promote anymore. So it has nothing to do with model building, but I kind of have my pseudo Matt's Models Customs name.
That's great.
So.
So since you don't advertise,
yep.
How many commissions are you typically working on at any given time, or what kind of is there a waiting list? Is there?
Yeah, so I only work on one project at a time. I used to have multiples going, but I found that I wasn't getting anything done. So when I start a project, that's what I work on. So I won't start anything else until this guy's done. The only exception to that is if I'm doing 3D printing. That's something I can do, like the digital work at night, and I can put it on my printer, and it takes days to print, so that's printing in the background while I'm doing this. The wait time is anywhere from 3 to 6 months. I try to stay booked out that far. That's just how I work. I know some other painters are booked out for a year or two, but that to me is just too much lead time. Some guys want their stuff done right away. I'm like, well, then you need to find someone else. But I like your work. It's like, hey, well, then you got to wait. So luckily right now I have the client that has me doing the beast. He's got, I think in my queue, out of what I have in my queue, I'd say over 50% of it is his stuff. So I'll do a piece for him, and then I'll work in someone else's piece. So that way he's not having to shell out a ton of money every week to me, even though he can afford it. It gives him a break. But then I just kind of piggyback. And a lot of times I have to kind of move things around. I'll have something in the queue, and I'll reach out to a client, like, "Hey, I'm ready to paint your piece." Like, "Hey, can you wait a little while?" So then I'll move stuff around. I've got a client that I reached out to twice and he hasn't replied that I'm ready to paint. It's like, I don't know where he is, but I've got his kit here. So, and they're not cheap. So, I mean, yeah. So yeah, there's usually about I tell people 3 to 4 months on average. And then depending on how life goes, sometimes it's quicker, sometimes it's a little bit longer. But the key to it is communication and just keeping clients in the loop as far as where they go. Sometimes, because I don't have like a list, I don't have anything written down. It's just kind of in my head. I look at the boxes, I know, okay, this is next, that's next. So maybe maybe I should start doing that, but I never have. But sometimes like it depends on my mood. Sometimes I'll want to do something like if I just did a beast. Maybe I don't want to do another beast right away. So I'll reach out, hey, I just did this. Do you mind if I push yours 1 or 2 back if I'm doing the same character just to kind of break it up a little bit? Sometimes it's convenient to do the same thing back to back because a good example, I just did a Juggernaut a little while ago for a client and I had another one in the queue. And so I finished the first one and then my other client's like, oh, I like what you did there. I want to do the same thing. So I reached out to some other clients like, hey, do you mind if I put his first because he wants the same thing and it's fresh in my head? So I just kind of moved it around so that way it's as similar as possible. But yeah, so 6 months on average, I'd say, is the wait time.
And do you have a favorite character or a favorite thing to work on? What's your personal favorite?
If I chose a character, probably Captain America. It's like one of my favorite things to paint. I kind of just like the character. I've never read a comic book in my life. Most of these guys that hire me are comic junkies. They grew up reading comic books, so they have an emotional attachment to certain comics or characters. It sounds really, I'm really not into reading that much. I mean, I'm a very visual person, so I watch movies. Like Marvel character, I have to say Captain America. I like the character. I kind of like his story. And it's just kind of a fun character to paint. I like the colors. I just did a Magneto. I was talking about. I like doing Magnetos. It also depends on the sculpt. There's some things I get that I never thought I'd like painting, but then the sculpt is really cool. And that's kind of how I base on what I like to do personally. I really don't look at like, do I like the character? Do I like the movie or the show? If it's a cool sculpt, it's like, oh man, that's really cool. That's how I used to buy things for myself. I didn't care who it was or what it was. As long as I thought that the sculptor or the kit was cool, I'd buy it and, put it in my collection to maybe paint someday. And like the Magneto I just did, the cape is sculpted extremely well, so it gives a lot of motion to the piece. So Thor's maybe my first surprise, like, oh, it just looks really cool when it's all done. A lot of times, it's like a lot of art forms, there's like a crap load of Wolverines out there. He's like one of the top characters that sculpted. Like how many times can you sculpt Wolverine, pissed off with his claws out? So every once in a while you'll get one that's like, oh, that's maybe a different take on him. That's really cool. There's a kid over here, Rhino, it's off frame. I did a smaller version. I now have a large version. So when I first did the first one, it was just, when I got done, I was like, man, this is really cool. It's a great sculpt. It's super simple. He's just standing there. But even though he's just standing there, the sculpt kind of tells the story of the character. So that was kind of a surprise when I got done with it. Oh man, this is really cool. And I did another one for someone else. And then luckily someone is doing a bigger version of them. So I'm really looking forward to doing that because it's super simple. And he's not moving, but it just looks cool. There's some different painting techniques in there too that I don't use a whole lot of. So that maybe sometimes I'm using techniques that I'm not used to or I'm having to learn. So that will also play into like how much am I enjoying this piece. Because a lot of times when you post work, if anything, someone will see it kind of like going back to Juggernaut. Oh, I like what you did there. Let's do that again. And that's great to an extent. I'll give you a really good example of that. So what got me really noticed in the collector world is there's a Hellboy by a sculptor. His name's Naren. He's out of Korea. And it's based on the Ron Perlman Hellboy. The face sculpt looks just like Ron Perlman. But he's kind of lean. The sculpture's pretty lean. And he's just standing there, nothing too exciting. But it's got a lot of great details. It's a fantastic sculpt. And so I did one, and I posted photos on that. And I did another one. And I've done 9 of them. So, because people like what I did. And kind of going back to learning techniques, that's where I kind of came up with the leather technique on his belt. I needed a leather on his belt. And I just kind of and that was really enjoyable because I came up with this technique that worked really, really well, but then everyone wanted that same thing. So like, okay, and I kept raising my rates on it to the point where finally people stopped hiring me to do it because they're like, I don't want to spend that. Well, that's what it's going to take me to do another Hellboy, because I've done it 9 times, and as fun as it is to do, I'm kind of over it. But you kind of get known for certain things, as whether you're a painter or a sculptor. You know, for me, I'm known for Hellboy. I've got a friend who does a ton of Hulks. He's very good at Hulk, and he's like, man, I've done something. It's like he's kind of over it, but he's really good at it, and you know, he's getting paid well to do it. So. Yeah, but it's like, I'm trying to think of something that surprised me. I can't think of anything off the top of my head. They're like, oh, okay, that was a surprise that I enjoyed that. You know, it's kind of like I just kind of get in a mode, a work mode or a creative mode. And whether I'm listening to music or having TV going in the background, I just kind of get really hyper-focused on whatever it is I'm doing that day. And just kind of, and it's usually not till the next day or a couple days later when I look at it, it's like, oh, that looks really good. So like when I'm doing skin, again, this is my ADHD brain going off tangents. I'll work on his face or skin tones for a day. And I was like, man, this looks like crap. I'm just not really liking it. And after 10 or 12 hours, I got to just walk away. And I come back the next day, it's like, oh, it actually looks pretty good. Because you've been looking at something for so long, and you don't know if it's where you want it. Mm-hmm. So I've learned that when I get to a point where either I think it looks like crap, or I'm not sure, step away and come back and look at it the next day. And 9 times out of 10, it's where I needed it to be. On a rare occasion, I'll go make an adjustment. Usually, I've kind of learned that once I get to that point, I'm where I need to be. So, and that's just from experience.
So, do you have a favorite project that you?
Oh man, that's a good question. Probably if I had to pick one right now, I did a Samurai Wolverine last year for a client, and it's a piece that ever since I saw it, I just wanted to paint it. Super hyper detailed samurai armor. It's got like 5 different heads that are interchangeable. He's got a torso that has no armor, so you have a bare torso, and then you have a torso with all the armor on it. And it's got this huge cherry blossom tree that's behind him. And so I was able to acquire a kit, and I had a client who I knew wanted one. It's like, hey, I got this kit. I'll sell it to you for, I'm not going to, what they call flip, where you buy something and charge double. So I just wanted the experience of painting it. And it's like, it's going to be expensive because it's going to be a month and a half worth of work. That's probably my favorite, just because the amount of work that went into it. I was really, really proud of that piece. I mean, I spent hours with a little paintbrush, just doing like for 4 days, just painting like, so samurai armor, they typically have like markings on their, like little knots of rope. And I don't know the significance of it, to be honest. But this guy had like 700 markings on his armor, and they all had to be like hand painted, and they're dimensional, they're not just flat. So you had to paint the top and the sides, and then so you put down one color. Well, that's really boring. I have to go put a highlight on it. So the armor alone took me 2 weeks just to paint the armor, 75 hours. So all the work put into that and seeing it done, and I was really happy with the skin tones and everything. And there's some techniques in there I kind of had to apply that I really wasn't sure how to do. He sent me some references like, well, I'm not sure I'm going to achieve that. So I just kind of, again, looking past the subject matter and looking at the colors and what I'm looking at, is like, okay, I can do it by doing this. And it worked out. So I'm really proud of that piece because it just took a long time. And my client was super happy with it, even though it's crazy expensive. But it was just a lot of work. Yeah, right now, it's probably my favorite. There's one other that I would consider my best work, would be a Captain America that I did a couple of years ago as a prototype. And it's from an alternative comic called Secret Empire. It's based on comic artwork. Captain America is actually part of Hydra. And if you don't know what Hydra is, they're like the bad guys. So he's like, his uniform's torn. He has a Hydra logo on his chest. And I did a prototype for a company a couple years ago. And that's probably, I would consider that still some of my best work. So I'm really proud of that one. Everything just kind of came together, and I did everything right. Sometimes you're struggling. It's like, man, there have been times I've spent a day painting something, and I just like, this looks like crap, and I've just started over. Skin tones, like I just had a recent project where I was working on skin tones, and by the end of the day, it's like, this is not looking good. I just took the paint off and started over. It's a great thing about paint. It's just paint.
Yeah.
You can paint over it or take it off and start over.
How many projects do you think you've done so far?
That's a good question. I do a recap post every year on Facebook of what I've done. And I think last year was kind of a slow year because I actually had some photography work that kind of interrupted. I think last year I did like 30. I think the year before that I did around 45. So my goal is to get a project done every week, week and a half. Again, it depends on how long it takes. But overall, probably a couple hundred. Since I've been doing this full time, probably around 100, 120 maybe. Probably 200 altogether since people started paying me to do this.
So where do you see the future of Matt Mrozek's custom models?
I was just talking to I was talking to a bunch of people about this. So I don't see myself painting full time like to retirement. It's not a fiscally realistic achievement or goal. Although I do have one friend that's been doing it for like 25 years and he's like in his 60s. The hobbies change. This particular hobby, model building, modeling, painting, it's kind of like digital photography. It's kind of at that cusp where the old traditional clay sculpting is slowly kind of being replaced by digital sculpting. So 3D printing is becoming very, very more and more popular as it becomes more accessible, less expensive to do. Anyone that's a serious model builder or hobbyist will have a 3D printer or several. I own 3 right now. I had 6 at one time. As far as myself goes, I'm going to keep painting and building while people continue to hire me. Knock on wood, they'll keep happening. As far as like the future goes, I have a couple ideas, like whether I've always wanted to have like my own line of hobby supplies, like paints. There's a particular paint I love to use. It's made in Japan, so it's expensive to get here, but it's like my favorite brand. So looking at that, again, that's kind of like there's a lot of people in the game, and that part of the hobby is like paints. But it's just something that's where I'm not doing all the building and painting and stuff. It would be great to maybe have a business partner and do some license pieces. That gets very expensive to do. Buying the license is crazy. And I think the worst part about doing license pieces is that your creative freedom basically goes out the window. The few commercial pieces I've done, it's paint by number. The last one I did a Master Chief from the Halo video game for me called Gaming Heads. And they sent me, basically, it looks like a psychedelic color chart of the figure with all the different Pantone colors. And if you don't know what Pantone colors are, they're universal color codes for colors and fabrics and paints and all that stuff. So it was paint by number. And I had a little bit of creative, it was like how I could weather and stuff, but it was, this part needs to go this green, this part needs to go black. And it's like, and it's just a very slow process. And then they have revisions, and it's not a fun process. It's not enjoyable. This stuff is fun with private collectors because for the most part, and I tell people this all the time, when you hire an artist, no matter what kind of art it is, hire the artist you like their work and how they do something. Don't hire me to paint like someone else because you're not going to be happy. Don't hire a photographer to shoot like someone else because you're not going to be happy. Hire the artist you like what they do. So with the private collector, they give me reference, and then they're like, this is kind of what I want it to look like, but do your thing. So I have a little more creative freedom in my input. So my future, I need to find something where I'm not doing this all the time. Because I don't think realistically it's a viable long-term career. I could be wrong. As things get more and more expensive, the number of collectors out there is going to get smaller and smaller. It's not cheap. I mean, on the low end, you're going to spend a couple $1,000s to buy a kit and hire a painter. On the high end, you can spend $10,000, depending on the size of the piece and how long it takes. The Samurai Wolverine I did took me 6 weeks. It was 250 hours of just paint, and that was very. And I usually don't negotiate my rates, but on that one, my client's like, well, let's just not do the cherry blossom tree because we're getting, like, the price is getting high. I was like, it's going to take a long time. And like, tell you what, I'm going to cap my rate at this, but let me finish it. I usually don't do that, but this particular client has given me a lot of work, and he's the only one that I like negotiate, that I'll give him a price break, because he's been really good to me as a client. I charge him less than I charge other people. My hourly rate's less for him because he gives me a lot of work, and he gives me a lot of creative freedom. It's like this kind of, it's like here's like this piece. I kind of want to look like this, but do your thing. And it's rare that like I'll send him photos and he wants me to change anything. It's like, no, that looks great. Or I'll do something that he didn't want because I think it'll look better. It's like, you know what, you're right. That does look better. So yeah. The future, I don't know, man. It's like I'm just gonna keep plugging away and see where it goes. Who knows? But I think really, there is a need in the U.S. for, like, as far as like 3D printing goes. Again, this would be like another business venture, but like the capability to print very large pieces in one go. So like all the 3D printers that people can buy now that are affordable, say sub $3,000 for a printer, they can print pretty big. But even like this big stuff has to be cut up into smaller pieces, which means you have to put it back together and fix all the seams. When you get into the industrial printers, they're big. You can print, I've looked at printers that print 2 feet squared, or cube, sorry, 2 feet, wide, 2 feet deep, and 2 feet tall. That's like the smallest printer that I would look at purchasing as an industrial 3D printer. But now we're looking at hundreds of thousands of dollars for a printer. And then the cost of materials is very expensive, because right now it's all being done in China because the cost is so much lower. But I get all the time asked, can you print this at home? I'm like, yeah, but you got to cut up into 40 pieces. I can do it, but you're going to spend more me putting it back together and fixing it than if you just took it somewhere else in China. So there's like, as far as the collector world, I think there's a need in the U.S. for that service. Whether that's a viable business venture, I have to do a lot of more research. So yeah, if I want to stay in the collector world, it'd have to be sort of something like that, whether it's 3D printing services or some sort of modeling supply company.
Do you still see it as a creative outlet, or now do you find you're doing other things for creative outlets?
No, it's interesting because I started as a photographer for a creative outlet, and that turned into a job. And then it turned out that I never did any photography for fun. The last time I did photography for fun was in 2015. I went on a road trip with a friend, and we did a photo road trip, and that was a blast because I actually had to relearn kind of how to see things. I was so used to looking at things for, a different purpose that I forgot how to look at things for a creative purpose in the photography world. This is a little bit different because even though I paint a lot of the same characters or whatever, even though it's work, I really enjoy it. Now I'm only been doing this 3 years for full time for 3 years, but so far I still enjoy the whole process. My enjoyment is when I'm finished with something and the client gets it and they love it. They're like, man, this looks way better than the photos. It's like, no, I know I've done my job. They're going to enjoy it way more than I would because once I'm done with something, I don't have the need to continue to look at it in the future. I have a very small display of stuff I've done in the past. It gets dusty. It's more hassle than it is. There's a few pieces that I look back with some nostalgia that I have some emotional attachment to. But I don't get emotionally attached to things after I'm done with it. I've had the experience of building it and painting it. And after that, then I'm done. I also get enjoyment from going to the conventions and showing my work and learning from others or people asking me, well, how do you achieve that, whatever, that look? That's also very enjoyable. So I enjoy the process of the building and the painting, especially on pieces that are more challenging. When I'm done with it, it's like, okay, that was worth all the work. My client's going to appreciate it because they're not cheap. They're expensive. It's expensive to hire someone like me to paint something, to build and paint something. But it's like with any other collector of any type of art form. They appreciate the work. They appreciate the creative creative process, the artistry that goes into it, the skill that goes into doing something like that, and they're going to enjoy it way more than I am. So that's where I get my satisfaction out of this whole process. Is once something shipped, they get it. Like the Magneto I just finished, the guy's like, man, this looks way better. Your photos don't do it justice. And I take nice photos of my work. But just the nature of photography, you can't, your eye's going to pick up way more detail than the camera ever will. So, using strobe lights washes out a lot of details, even though I spend, a couple hours photographing each piece. You're just never going to see all the detail in a photo, especially if it's very subtle. If it's very, like skin tones, very subtle skin tones, the flash is going to wash it out immediately. So they get like, oh man, the faces look way better. The guy told you, it's like a lot of times I tell clients, trust me, it looks great in person, because a cell phone photo on my desktop with shitty lighting is not going to look good. But I just give them the idea, hey, this is where we're going. Don't worry, it's not. My phone tends to add a lot of red to photos. It's like, it's not that red. I've tried editing, but it never turns out right. But I just kind of, hey, this is where I'm going. And like a lot of times, just trust me, it's looking good. And 9 times out of 10, they like, okay, no problem. But yeah, so that's my creative aspect, is like the process, working with people and trying to get them something that they're going to enjoy for years to come. That's where my enjoyment is. Yeah.
Awesome. And is there a character that you have not had an opportunity to paint yet that you still would love to paint?
That's funny. I get asked that a lot, and I might say I really can't think of anything. Like, I really want to paint that. Again, it really depends on the sculpt. Yeah. So it could be any character as long as I find the sculpt interesting. Again, not being someone who grew up reading comic books, I don't have any emotional attachment to any particular character. Yeah. You talk to most serious collectors, and they have a favorite character. I know a guy, his favorite character is Silver Surfer, and he's got like 30 Silver Surfers in his collection. They're all from different painters, sculptors, collectible companies. He just has a thing for Silver Surfer. So to me, I don't have like a. Again, it's like when I did the Samurai Wolverine, I saw the sculpt initially. Oh, that would be really cool to paint. So I look at more of a sculpture more than the character. So that's how I look for something that I want to do.
And one other thing here. So you mentioned that like with the Silver Surfer, the guy had all the Silver Surfer. Mm-hmm. Some of those are from collectible companies. Right. So what makes them different? Something like that different than like what you're doing?
Yeah. So there's really two areas in this world of collecting. They're called statues. You have licensed pieces, which are pieces that companies pay Marvel or DC or whatever they're making. They pay them a licensing fee, and then they are able to produce pieces for collectors. And those usually come as a pre-painted statue. So they, like Sideshow is the biggest one in the world. They're based in California. They have licenses for, you name it, they got it. Transformers, Marvel, DC, Harry Potter, any big name they got a license for. They hire freelance sculptors, and they also have in-house sculptors that will sculpt something based on a concept art. The biggest difference between licensed and unlicensed, well, there's two. One, you're paying for a licensing fee, and you have the ability to basically make as many as you want. But now you're dealing with the licensor. So if you're making a beast, which is Marvel, now you have to deal with the IP owners, and they have to approve all your concepts and stuff. So your hands are tied to a certain extent as far as what they will let you do with that particular character or sculpt. Unlicensed, which is what this would be considered, the sculptor has complete free reign to do what they want creatively, but now they have the chance of getting sued by this company. More than likely, that's not going to happen because they're selling very small numbers. On the high end, it's like 60 pieces, and sometimes they come as a pre-paint, and sometimes they come as a kit. Sometimes they come as both. They'll give people the option: do you want to buy the pre-paint, or do you want to buy the kit? So licensed, 99% of the time, is going to come as a pre-painted statue that you take it out of the box, it's ready to go. Unlicensed, it can be either or. And so like a lot of collectors, the prototype is one thing, but then they get the production piece and it's not even close. So they'll buy the kit, or they even buy the pre-painted and then hire someone like me to either repaint it or paint it. So what I primarily do are full paint jobs. Like I said, the Beast here is a 3D print. So this was sent to me. I actually own the files to this thing, so I could print this if I wanted. I have the files. I can scale it however big I want. I can scale it however small I want, depending on the size of my printer. And I can print it. Now, if I print this piece and I try to sell 100 or 200 of them, Marvel's probably going to come after me for doing a bunch of beasts that I don't have a license to. And to be honest, I'm not sure how these sculptors get around, because a lot of them out there. Patreon is huge for guys who sculpt these characters, and you pay a monthly subscription, you can have access to all their files. That may be coming sooner than later as far as like cease and desist on all these sculptors. But yeah, the unlicensed stuff is usually very low numbers. Marvel's not going to come after someone who's making 30 Wolverines. Now, if they try to make 500 Wolverines, they're going to get in trouble. And 9 times out of 10, these unlicensed pieces are overseas too, where copyright laws are very, very loose, non-existent.
Yeah.
China has like no copyright laws. So that's why all your reproduction, Versace and all that stuff is coming from China, because they can try to sue them, but they're not going to win. The Chinese government's not going to go after them. So that's the main difference, is the unlicensed stuff, like what I do for collectors. It's low numbers. You can get them as a pre-paint or as a kit. The licensed stuff more than likely is going to come as a pre-paint, although some licensed companies do offer kits, but usually not very often. The price difference between buying, like even in the unlicensed customs, what we call unlicensed custom, which would be like the Beast here or any other kits I have out. The price difference between buying a pre-painted piece and the kit version is usually about $100.
Oh, wow.
It's very low. So if the pre-paint, let's say that a company's making 30 Wolverines, they're going to sell 2 as a pre-painted and 10 as a kit. The 20 that are pre-painted, let's say it's $900. Well, the kit may be only $800. So the factory's like, they're trying to make it so they have a factory full of workers to paint this stuff. So the collectors that hire painters like me, they just want a higher quality job, and that's what they're getting. A factory's not going to spend 80 hours painting something. They can't do that. Even on like the sideshow where they're making a lot of something, they can't spend that much time on a piece. Collectors that they just want a higher quality job, they're willing to pay for it. They know they're going to get what they want, and it's technically one of a kind, because it's not going to be the same as everyone else's.
So since these are kind of one of one, is there then a resale market for these?
There was. That's kind of what the way things are going now, just in the world with inflation and things. The collecting world, as far as this has kind of hit a bubble. Just recently, there have been a lot of collectors offloading their entire collections for whatever reason, and they're not able to get what they paid for something. There are a few exceptions to that. So I mentioned when I first got into this, there's a kit of a beast standing on a desk. That's what kind of got me down a rabbit hole to find this stuff. I was eventually able to buy 3 of those kits, and I had 3 of them in my possession. I wish I would have held on to those, because when I sold them for what I bought. I think I paid, on the low end, I paid $1,600. On the high end, I paid $1,800. And when I sold them for what I bought them for. That same kit now, if you can find one, goes between $5,000 and $8,000 for the unpainted kit. I had 3 of them. Some people try to sell for 10. I'm not sure they're getting that, but it's that sought after right now. As far as like if you're a collector and you hire me to paint something and you're trying to resell that collectible, you're going to lose money, because collectors want something that's been done for them. Mm-hmm. Even if it's someone who, let's say I have 2 collectors and they want the same character done. More times than not, if collector 1 hires me to do this character, and he decides he wants to sell it, and Collector 2 wants the same character done by me, 9 times out of 10, Collector 2 is going to hire me to do it again rather than buy from Collector 1. And simply it's because it's that mentality that I hired this person to do it for me. Whether he can get it for slightly less or the same price, more than likely they're going to hire me to do it again. Sometimes not. Sometimes they want it quicker or, whatever. But it's that mentality that I hired so-and-so and this was done for my collection. So it's that mentality that is, yeah, it's similar to what he did, but this is for me. So that's kind of part of it. And it's also part of it, whether you hire me, and it says, well, you hire, there's probably about 4 or 5 of us that do this full time in the U.S. that I know of. We're hired by different collectors for specific things. Like I said, Hellboy, I was the Hellboy guy for a couple of years. So, there's also the kind of a little bit of a bragging right. I had Matt Mrozek paint this for me, or my friend Jason Fielder painted my Hulk. He's the Hulk guy, Jason did this Hulk. So kind of a little bit of a bragging right. So the guy that I'm doing this for, he just sent me a bunch of photos of all the stuff I've done for him. He's like, oh man, I forgot I've done all those for you. It's been like, I did like 15 pieces for you. And so he's like, it's like everyone wants to see your work. They can just come visit my collection because a lot of it's your work. So he just likes what I do. He likes how the effort I put into it. And he likes the end results. So yeah. So the resale value is hit or miss. Right now it's kind of hit a bubble. People are selling stuff. Particularly like the stuff from Sideshow, you're not going to make money on it, especially if it's still available, retail. Sideshow has one particular piece. It's a Hulk that came out years and years ago that sells for obscene amount of money. And I think it's ugly personally, but it sells on the low end, $8,000 to $12,000.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. I have a client that has one. He's actually not a modeling client. He's a photo client. I did some headshots for him. But he collects also. So we got to talk. He's like, yeah, I have that OG Hulk. They call it OG, old Grail Hulk. I was like, you do? It's like, yeah, it's still in the box. Like, dude, if it's still in the box, you probably get like 12 grand for that. He's like, what? It's like, hey, seriously. It's like, I'm going to have to sell this thing. It's like, yeah, it's like they'll go for an obscene amount of money. And I think it's personally one of the ugliest Hulks ever, but it's got a very distinct style. By a famous artist named Kirby. And so it's just, that particular one always sells for crazy amounts of money. Isn't that I'm dumbfounded sometimes how much people spend on this stuff. It's like, I'll work on something and I'll look at it. I'm going to go back to the Samurai Wolverine because it took so long. It's like, man, I feel bad, but it just is what it is. That's how much time it took me to do it. It's like, and people ask me to negotiate my rates, but I just can't. I've got other people willing to pay me what I'm asking. So I don't do that because my time away from my family and other things is worth a certain amount per hour to me. And that's what I judge it on. And also I raised my rates this year because inflation. My costs of supplies have gone up on some things 100%. It's not cheap to do something like this. My cost to paint something can be a couple $100 on supplies, and so you may see a bill for $2,000, but that's not what I'm bringing home. So yeah, it's like anything else. You got to pay for the stuff. Yeah, I have stuff coming today. Okay. Sometimes I don't know what I'm getting. Sometimes people send me stuff I don't even know it's coming. It just shows up. So I've had that happen a few times. I'll get a notification like, what is this? And why is it? Who's sending this to me? Because I have my address on my Facebook page, and sometimes, like this client has sent me stuff before. Like, oh, by the way, you're getting something tomorrow. Like, okay, hopefully I'm home because I've only had one thing stolen so far. But again, these things are expensive. I mean, they can be thousands of dollars before I even get a hold of it. Most times they're too big to carry and run off with, so someone's not going to steal a 60-pound box and run off. But I have had one kit stolen a couple years ago, and it was small enough that they got it. But so right now I got Beast going on. This is my current project. Hopefully I'll get them done in the next week or so. And then after that, I mentioned Rhino over here to the side, which is a prototype casting. and I'm going to do 2 versions of that. I'm going to do a painted version, and then I'm going to just prep one so it looks like it's ready, so it's ready for paint, because this particular producer wants to offer a pre-painted version and a kit version. So I've got that coming up. I have a couple Gundams coming up in my queue, which I haven't done in a few years. I'm looking forward to that. Those are very long, those are probably 6-week long projects because of the amount of work involved. And I've got a bunch of I've got some repairs. I do some small repairs every once in a while. I usually don't like doing those. Usually not worth my time. But I'll do them. Got a couple Spider-Mans, you name Marvel characters. This particular client also has, he's got me doing, there's a series of busts from not Hellboy, but I do have a Hellboy bust. But it's Hellboy, Abe, Cronin, yeah. So one of my friends who's a kit producer is putting out a line of busts. So I've got Hellboy, Liz, Abe, Cronin, and then I just got a Mr. Wink. So it's a series of busts. Are about, I'm not sure what scale they are. They're probably quarter scale, maybe a little bit bigger. So those are in the queue. But yeah, hopefully people keep sending me stuff. That's my goal, is to keep working. Yeah, I mean, I was a freelance photographer for 10 years, and then I was in the corporate world for 10 years, and now I'm back to freelancing. So, they both have their pluses and minuses. The corporate world is great because you get a paycheck every 2 weeks and you have benefits. Unfortunately, when the corporate world, you deal with corporate crap. The freelance world is great because you kind of, luckily I have enough work where I'm working every day. So, I work just about every day, and even on the weekends I'll put a couple hours in here or there. But yeah, so I've been lucky that I have really like 3 clients that keep me busy. And I think most people who are freelance artists or that deal with this kind of thing, they'll get 1 or 2 clients that just really like what you do, and then keep hiring you. So I'm lucky to have 1 or 2 though. But yeah. So again, knock on wood, I get a few more. I will say that I'll get people that I'll get first timers who never hired a painter, and they don't know the process. I have to kind of teach them, at least the way I do things, because everyone handles their business a little bit different. Like, well, this is the way I do it, and you kind of build a relationship with that person before you actually get any work done. I have a new client that hired me to do a Superman, and initially he was going to buy a statue that he really likes, but he wants it painted differently. So we were going to do that. And then he found a 3D sculpt he really liked, so I was going to print it and paint it. And now he's going back. Now he's back to buying the pre-painted statue. That's actually one of the things coming up today. It's a pre-painted statue, but he looks like he's all weathered and cracked and stuff. So I have to go in and I have to smooth it all out and make him look brand new and repaint it. He just likes the sculpt. So we're going to convert it from this marble weathered statue to a brand new looking Superman. So he actually interviewed me a couple weeks ago. We chatted on the phone, and he's like, I'm looking at you, I'm looking at 2 other painters. He's like, actually, I talked to you the longest. I go, well, that's just because I talk a lot. But I picked his brains. I really like, okay, so what are you looking for? Why do you like this? Why do you like that? What's your end goal? And so, we just chatted for about an hour and a half about what he wanted. And he's like, I really like the way you took the time to talk to me and really find out what I wanted. So I'm going to hire you. He's like, okay, cool. So I think I'm the first person you ever hired as a painter. So you have to teach people sometimes when they're hired, gone through the process. And one of the first questions I asked was like, well, why'd you pick me? What is it that I do that you like? So that's kind of like one of the first things. And like, okay. After that, okay, well, if you like what I do there, that's perfect. If you don't like what I do, then hire someone else. But one reason people hire me is because one of the comments I get is like, my work's really clean. And that's because there's not a lot of time masking. So the time put into it shows in the results. And not that other painters they don't paint clean, but mine just has a certain crispness to it. I think I get just for the way I do things. I do some 3D printing, not a ton, but when I do 3D printing, I do mostly what I consider what I call a master print. So it's for people who are going to make kits eventually. So they'll send me their 3D files. We'll get it to the scale they want. I'll print it Because when you get 3D print, it needs a lot of work. It's rough. It's got support marks. It's got maybe some printing artifacts, things that don't fit quite right, even though it's a 3D sculpt. So I'll do all the prep work and get it ready for paint. And then I send that piece and I send it to their molder and caster, and I'll make molds and castings of it. So when I do 3D printing, it's usually what I call a master print. It's rare that I get hired to print and paint something because people usually freak out when they find out how much that costs. Yeah, it's not cheap. Yeah. So like this 3D print, I know that this 3D print, my client bought it from this particular guy, I think was like $450, which is really inexpensive. It's less than what I would charge to print this. Yeah, and for a piece this big, that's really a good price.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Now I've got a lot of work to get it to work, but to get everything fitting, but the initial cost was relatively low, and I say relatively low. A lot of people is like $450. Like, yeah, for this, that's a really good price.
Yeah, I'd say so. For something that large.
Yeah. And it's actually a really, really good print. But even though it's a really, really good print, it still has a lot of work. So, and that's one reason I started doing YouTube years ago, is to show people this is what it takes to go from this box of parts to this finished thing. And then similar, like whenever I do something, I don't do a lot of YouTube now, but if I'm doing like a 3D print, like I do a lot of live broadcasts on Facebook now. It's just easier. I can throw my phone up. I can work real time. People can kind of ask me questions. My client will chime in and ask me questions or, stuff like that. But it's really to show clients, okay, this is what it takes. This is why it costs what it costs. Because it's time consuming. It just takes time. It's like anything else. To get good results, you got to put time in. And there is some skill involved.
Just a little.
Yeah, it's like everyone's like, I use the word professional not very often, because I've got so much to learn, even in what I do now. It's like I'm always learning. You're never going to know everything, but it's constant education as far as like techniques or what's out there. And so it's like, I never call myself a professional in anything, because even when I was a photographer, I never called myself a professional photographer, because I never felt like I was that good. So I use that term. I never use the term professional. I was like, I build models. That's what I tell people.
Well, Matt, thank you very much for your time today.
No problem, man. Thanks for coming over.
It's been fantastic. I think you got some great stuff here.
All right. Well, you'll have fun editing all that jabber down.